folks, Kimberly here with Lickety Stitch Quilts Block of the Month. This is a Three Sisters pattern and aptly named. They give you 3 different setting options and 3 different colorways. I wanted to start out real quick just by talking a little bit about the pattern. I had not worked with one written quite this way before, so as I worked through it, there are a couple of things that I have just noticed. First off, you want to be thinking about your settings. You don't have to, but you totally could be doing the settings as you go, so it wasn't done in one great big chunk at the end. And they do give you general instructions, fabric requirements, and then finishing instructions for each of the quilts. If you find that you're missing a page, or there's something you're looking for and you can't find, check your page numbers and let us know. Today, we are going to be working on the Block 1 Kansas Troubles. So a pretty straightforward block. We're going to mostly follow the pattern directions. Where we're not, I'll give you a heads up. You want to be thinking about your colors to start. Do whatever makes your heart happy. They do list the colors they have chosen, but they give you this blank here just in case you choose to do something different. And you can write your colors in so you don't lose track. I did that. I'm ending up recutting an entire block because I got my lights, darks, and mediums mixed, and the end result was just kind of odd. So for the most part, I'm following their light, dark, and medium pattern, not necessarily their colors. The other thing that was odd to me that they don't tell you is these blocks do finish at 12.5 inch unfinished, 12 inches in the quilt. They don't give you the grid. So for this first block, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 units across and up and down. So we know that with an 8 unit layout that ends up as a 12-inch finished blocks, each of these units will be 1 1/2 inches finished, which means that when we have to square our half square triangles, for example, we're going to square them to 2 inches before we sew them in. So that's pretty important to know with half square triangles because if you are like me, they don't end up perfect every time and you end up squaring. And the half square triangles are actually where we might not be exactly following the pattern instructions. So the first thing we're going to do, the first thing I do is I starch my fabric. I like to starch my fabric. You might use best press or some other formulation. I starch because I like the way it makes the fabric react, and because I do end up with some biases on the outsides. Little something somebody showed me is I have an old Tupperware bucket lid that when I starch, I put my fabric on and I starch so that I don't get it all over my sewing table or my ironing surface. It just keeps things nice and clean, and then these can go in the tub and get rinsed off really quick, and it's good as new. You can use a cardboard box, the actual tub if you want to keep it contained, kind of like a paint box when you're using spray paint, but for starch, so that it doesn't go everywhere. Once it's all starched and pressed, if you choose to starch and press, you're going to start with the cutting instructions. So the cutting instructions for block 1, like I said, are pretty simple, pretty basic, except for those half square triangles. You're going to get your fabric all together that you want to use. I've got mine all together that I want to use. And we're going to start, I'm going to start with the bigger pieces first and the ones that I can cut together. So I can look at this pattern and right away I can see that A and F are the same size cuts and they go together. I'm going to cut those together. So I'm going to get my background fabric A. Oops, not on my pressing board. And I am going to break this video up into a couple different pieces because this is, I recorded this before and it gets too big to upload. So we'll have a couple parts and I hope you'll stick with it and finish it up. And my B fabric, and I'm not going to have you cut with me the whole time, but I'm just going to cut those according to our pattern directions, 7 1/4 inches square, and then we're going to cut the X through them as she's shown, corner to corner, corner to corner, We're going to end up with 4 triangles of each color and set those aside. The next piece that I would cut is that B piece, the dark piece that forms the center of the peaks. That is 3 7/8 by 3 7/8. So I would take my dark fabric and exactly follow those cutting instructions. I'm going to cut 2 of those and I'm going to cut them in half. I'm going to bisect them and I will end up with 4 triangles. Then we'll cut the H, the 4 2x2 squares from your background fabric again. For me, that's this white here. And then F and C are a slightly different color than your half square triangles D. If these were different blocks being set side by side against each other in a quilt, that would form a really cool secondary pattern. Since we're not doing that, I am going to cut them the same color as I cut my half square triangles so that it makes one unit throughout. So then I would cut, and because I would cut that together, I would cut my E and C units. I would cut them at 2 3/8 inch and then cut them in half. You don't need to round up on that. That 2 3/8 inch is actually, did I say that right? E and C. Yep, 2 3/8. Sorry. That ends up the right size. We're not going to square that off, so there's no need. There's no trimming to do that. Cut that at the right 2 3/8. 3/8 is the line on your ruler between the 1/4 inch and the 1/2 inch in case you're having trouble finding it. And you'll just line that right up. And then where we get to the fun stuff is the half square triangles. So the pattern directions have you cutting units D and G, 8 2 3/8 inch squares, and then cutting those into triangles, and then sewing those triangles to half square triangles. I don't have the patience for that, so I wouldn't do it that way. If you have a favorite half square triangle method, and maybe that's your method, do what makes your heart happy and what makes your quilt sing. For me, I would do one of 2 things. So if I were going to do that, I would be cutting those units a little bit big. I would actually cut them at 2 3/4 inch, and that gave me a nice generous trimming allowance there. So I might line my fabric up. Whoa, baby, that was bad. Line my fabric up at 2 3/4 inch. Let me trim that up because I'm going to want that square for my next set of cuts, and that's going to bum me out. And that's why I hold my ruler funny. And I need a new blade. So I would cut my 2 3/8 inch strips. Or I'm sorry, 2 3/4 inch strips from my background and my half square triangle fabric. And I would not cut these in half and make triangles. I would put them right sides together, cut my 2 3/4 inch squares so I have plenty of room to trim. And then just like we're all taught the very first way to make a half square triangle, I would make them 2 at a time and then trim them down. I'm not going to tell you what you should do because it's your quilt and your rules. I will tell you what I would do. If I were making them this way, I would leave these squares and I would either draw my line. I don't like to draw lines. I like to fold them point to point. Grab my handy dandy squisher. And squish that line in. And then take it to the machine, and I would sew on a 1/4 inch of each side and then cut it down the middle. Just like we all do. But I wouldn't do it that way, actually. I would take my fabric, and I am going to cut 4 3 1/2 inch squares. And I am a good steward of my time and resources, so I'm going to cut those together. So I've got them right sides together. I'm going to line up my 3 1/2 inch ruler line. And I would cut this so that I had, dang, I just put a new blade in and it's already skipping. I would have 4 of these. Get little scrappies there. And then I would take these, this creates 4 half square triangles. I would take these to the machine. I always sew my scant 1/4 inch. And I'm just going to sew all the way around all the edges. So I've sewn it all the way around. I've sewn it together. It doesn't open. You get this on your cutting mat and you're going to cut it corner to corner both ways. So you're going to cut 2 lines corner to corner. I can hear the quilt rules being broken because you're starting to figure out that when you open this up, I have bias on my outsides, and that's true. But when I make half square triangles, where I get the wiggle, what distorts my square is the center seam. Because as I open it, if I finger press it or I use my iron to press it, that wiggles sometimes because that's bias. I have much less trouble with my bias on the outside than I do on the inside. Sometimes when there's a lot of triangles, you want that bias on the outside because then you have some wiggle to make the points match. I like wiggle. It helps my stuff look better. So, because I starched my fabric, I don't have a lot of issue with this because I'm gentle with it. I know it's there. And then this gives me 4 half square triangles. Super fast, super easy. No stretching out the middle seam. So I am going to stop the video so that it's big enough to share, or small enough to share. I'm going to let you finish cutting your pieces, pick your half square triangle method, and come back and we will get on with assembly. So do your half square triangles, you're cutting, get your half square triangles trimmed to 2 inches, and come back and we'll assemble, or we'll start with assembly.